Hello and welcome to this special broadcast on Samvaad TV. I am Tina Jha. A parliamentary delegation from Zimbabwe, led by the Speaker of the Parliament of Zimbabwe, is currently on a visit to India. During their visit to the country, they've held meetings with President Draupadi Murmu, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, also Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla. Besides, the delegation has also visited the Parliament House, witnessed proceedings in both houses of the Indian Parliament, which reflects the collective will of the Indians, 135 crore Indians to be precise. Both India and Zimbabwe share a mutually positive, multifaceted relationship. Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla has now expressed hope that in the times to come, both countries will deepen this relationship, especially between the parliaments, which currently share a mutually positive relationship. So how can this relationship be taken forward in the times to come? How can both countries deepen their relationship across different dimensions of bilateral relationship? And how has the visit of the delegation of Zimbabwe been to India so far? We'll talk about all of these aspects and much more on this special interaction with the Speaker of the Parliament of Zimbabwe, Advocate Jacob Mudenda. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for your time. Welcome to Samvaad TV.
Thank you.
Let me begin the program by asking you first about the ongoing visit to India. And the first and the foremost being that this year for Indians is very significant. 2022 is a milestone journey for us. We mark 75 years of our independent journey. The fact that the Indian Parliament reflects the collective will of 135 crore Indians. Very soon, we will have a new Parliament building. You and your delegation at the fag end of this year have visited the Indian Parliament building. You witnessed proceedings in both houses. How has been your experience? Do share with us and our viewers.
I think I must put into context my visit to India. My visit to India is premised on our national policy on engagement and re-engagement, and this has been pronounced by our President, Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, and the three arms of the state, and that is the executive, the judiciary, and parliament, are engaged in bilateral relations with their counterpart. And this is why I was pleased to get an invitation from Speaker Obila when we met in 2021 in Austria, Vienna, where he decided to graciously invite me to visit India. I graciously agreed to that invitation, and he promised me that he was going to put it in writing, which he did. And so we came on the basis of first ensuring that the two parliaments enhance parliamentary diplomacy by benchmarking on the best practices that we can share as the two institutions. Secondly, it is important that the benchmarking goes beyond the institutions themselves, but it must be premised also on the people to people in terms of members of parliament forming a friendship association which will see both parliaments exchanging views at that level. And our visit, therefore, is a culmination of a desire to benchmark on best practices. We did see the lower house in action, as well as the sitting of the upper house. In both instances, it was very clear that we did come under the British influence in terms of procedures. And I was pleasantly surprised that the procedures that have been followed by your parliament are similar to ours, except that on oral questions without notice, I realized that these questions were not immediately responded to by the respective ministers. And I was told that the questions are documented, and the ministers concerned will then deal with those issues that arise, and probably through the Hansard publication, the responses of the ministers will be documented accordingly. We also shared ideas on the importance of Parliament as an institution. There is no country in this world that can enjoy peace and order without the role of Parliament. Parliaments enact, first and foremost, the supreme law of the land, and that is the Constitution. And it does also enact subsidiary legislation in terms of the ordinary laws. And these laws, when obeyed by the citizens, then you have peace and order. And when you have peace and order, you can carry out the national development agenda within an environment that is very peaceful. So it is very critical, therefore, to share the legislative processes, how you can come up the best pieces of law which promote peace and order, which promote the ease of doing business, which answer to the constitutional requirement, particularly on the Bill of Rights. So this exchange has been quite useful in that regard.
Absolutely. You're right. The fact that, the Parliament, all of the laws that are debated upon and ultimately passed in Parliament, they represent the will of the people. The fact that in both our countries, women and youth are important fragments of the society, how can both parliaments now converge to increase their participation?
In Zimbabwe, we have what we call a junior parliament. A junior parliament meets at least once in a year in session, and the head of state and government, that is the president, attends with his array of ministers. And during the debate, the youngsters bring out issues they feel are relevant to themselves and are of national interest. And after their debate, the ministers are called upon to respond to the issues that are raised by the youth. And the responsibility of the ministers so present during the junior parliamentary sitting is that whatever the youth have raised in their junior parliament, they will ensure that the ministries implement some of the suggestions. Some of the suggestions may need budgetary input, and they will raise this when Parliament goes into the budgetary process, so that the requests that have come from the youth are covered in the national budget. We also have junior councils for local authorities, particularly in the urban areas. Again, this is to expose the youth to understand the matrix of local government. And in this way, we feel the youth may begin to appreciate their role. In fact, it is an important role because they are the future leaders that should take over.
Absolutely. And their role in nation building for both countries will be immense.
Yes, they have to take over from us. That's an obvious, statement.
I've been told it's your second term as speaker. So if you could also share with our, viewers who are watching us, and mostly youngsters again, what are the kind of initiatives that you have taken, in terms of smooth functioning of the Parliament?
One innovation that we've brought into our Parliament is the petition system, where we encourage members of the public to petition Parliament on issues of national interest. Some of these petitions relate to some Bill of Rights, where some rights have been infringed, and they call upon the particular portfolio committee to investigate such violations. Other petitions call for the reform of certain pieces of legislation. Others have called for the outright a repeal of some laws. One law that may interest you is our Health Act, which had been promulgated in 1954. And in 2020, such a law becomes very irrelevant. So the petitioners called for total repeal of that law so that Parliament will come up with a new law which addresses the current issues that affect the health delivery of the people of Zimbabwe.
Let me widen the ambit of the discussion and talk more about India-Zimbabwe relations. The fact that we have traditionally close relations, which today has grown into a multifaceted relationship. In fact, if I could take you back in time, I was reading in the 17th century, a great son of Zimbabwe, Dom Miguel, he was the heir to the imperial throne of the Mutapas who studied in Goa, and even today an inscribed pillar stands at a chapel in Goa, which is a tribute to his intellectual stature. So from there to now, the kind of relationship that India and Zimbabwe enjoy, how do you see that evolution across centuries, and also the fact that there are a significant number of persons of Indian origin who reside in Zimbabwe? So how are they strengthening our traditional relationship?
Well, the visit by the young prince to Goa illustrates that human beings can be very adventurous. They can cross what appears to be the physical borders as they hanker after whatever they are looking for beyond the borders of their own location. So the prince is a good example that you can cross over, just like what Vasco da Gama did when he came into, he sailed from Europe into India. But let me stress one important thing. The influence of your founding father, Mahatma Gandhi, has remained extremely legendary. It was through him that Africa began to awaken towards the need of self-determination, have the will to fight for their freedom. And indeed, our forebears in both Southern Africa, Central, West and Eastern Africa were inspired to rise and claim their independence. And in so doing, we're able to understand that human beings must be regarded as human beings, regardless of their origins, their race, their beliefs. What was critical, according to Gandhi, was that people are people, and they should be respected as people. That is why in Zimbabwe, we have accepted a big number of citizens of Indian origins who are doing extremely well in terms of their contribution to the GDP of Zimbabwe. They are mainly in commerce and creating therefore a huge area of employment in our country, let alone in our southern neighbors in South Africa. And we are living with them in harmony. And their contribution also in philanthropic work has been admirable, and we continue to admire their stay as fellow citizens of Zimbabwe.
Okay, it's heartening to know and also read the fact that India and Zimbabwe share mutually positive relationships, which has evolved traditionally over centuries. But are there newer areas of convergence that you see in which we can take our relationship forward?
The new areas of convergence obviously will impinge on increased trade between Zimbabwe and India. The figures at the moment are not laudable, and yet a number of memoranda have been signed between business people from India and Zimbabwe. Now, this is where the role of Parliament comes in terms of oversight. When I go back to Zimbabwe, I will ensure that we exercise the parliamentary role of oversight so that these memoranda are implemented yesterday. And in so doing, we'll be working with the executive to ensure that that happens. The other area is in sectors such as agriculture. I met some business people, and one group was talking about the new revolution of millet as a very important component in our advance towards ensuring that the world does enjoy nutrition. And this group is prepared to set up a hub in Zimbabwe, which hub will service Southern Africa within the SADC countries. And I will ensure that when I go back, this company is facilitated to set up that millet entity, which is critical for agriculture, but more importantly, is a response to the United Nations designation of 2023 as the year of the millet. And nutrition. So it is important that we upscale our bilateral relations as far as agriculture is concerned. There are opportunities also in mining, opportunities also in the field of small to medium enterprises. We want to see how India managed to upscale the operations of these SMEs so that they can grow from being small to bigger entities and therefore increase employment opportunities as well as assist in ensuring that the GDP of our country grows. And
Clearly,
in so doing, they will give Zimbabwe also a wider base for taxation, which is necessary in raising revenues for national economic development.
Right. So you're right. Huge potential that can still be explored to deepen this relationship. Another aspect that I want you to speak about is the fact that you come at a time in this month when India has just taken over the presidency of the G20. What are the kind of expectations that that Zimbabwe has from India? What are the issues that you would like India to actually rake up and more importantly, become the voice of the Global South?
The important thing I must start with is to congratulate India for its assumption of that leadership of the G20. India will soon become the fifth world economy, and its assumption of leadership will have impact in terms of redesigning the world economy that must try to reduce economic inequalities in the world, not only in the south, but also in the north and perhaps in the east and west. We expect the assumption of that leadership also to assist us enter the Commonwealth again. We expect the leadership of India to assist us to remove the illegal sanctions that have been imposed on Zimbabwe. And also we expect that the leadership of India in the G20 will play a critical role in ensuring that we have a resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has destabilized the world economy. There's no way that war should continue, and we believe that dialogue is the answer, just as we did in the First World War and the Second World War. War did not end war, but dialogue did end war.
So, in that aspect, if I could also ask you about the role of Zimbabwe, which is currently the president of the Pan-African Parliament. What are first the highlights of this presidency that Zimbabwe holds, and how is Zimbabwe using this opportunity to ensure the full participation of the citizens of Africa in the economic development, most importantly, the integration of the continent?
Well, the presidents of the Pan-African Parliament was spearheaded by Zimbabwe because we produced a candidate. But once that candidate is elected and becomes the president of the Pan-African Parliament, that person no longer belongs to us, he belongs to Africa. So the perspective of that leadership would be to ensure that, number one, Africa's Agenda 2063 is implemented speedily. Secondly, that the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement that has been adopted by the AU is also implemented speedily. Those are the two areas of responsibilities that the new president of the Pan-African Parliament must fulfill. Apart from that, there is need for the reformation of the Pan-African governance architecture. The rules will have to, in some cases, changed so that the governance architecture of the Pan-African Parliament becomes more robust, as well as making sure that it is a visible institution that will be pride of Africa,
right,
and the world at large.
Sure. I'll take one last question from you, because your visit to India is still ongoing. But till now, whatever you've seen, the meetings that you've had, the proceedings that you've witnessed in both houses of parliament, the interactions so far that you've had, what is the best memory that you carry back home and that you wish to implement it when you go back to your country?
The first one is the profound experience that I had when I visited the tomb of Mahatma Gandhi.
The Rajghat.
I'm an avid reader of his life. I'm also an admirer of his philosophy of nonviolence and humanism. My visit there was quite touching because at least I was able to pay my courtesies by laying a wreath on his mausoleum. That was the first experience that I had. Secondly, I enjoyed the wise exchange of ideas between the two speakers of parliament, and I was impressed that both the speakers of your parliament and myself look forward to strengthening our bilateral relations in a practical manner, so that as parliament we can see a better bilateral relations between India and Zimbabwe. Not at parliamentary levels only, but at people-to-people interface.
Certainly, because that is going to strengthen our relationship. That having been said, we'll have to stop at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for joining us on this special broadcast on Samvaad TV and speaking to us on these wide-ranging issues. Pleasure having you on the program today.
Thank you, Tina, for having me.
Thank you once again, and to you viewers, thank you very much for your time. Keep watching Samvaad TV.